Hey, everybody, it is Sherry Tutkus, and welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. We often talk about things that people do not want to talk about at all. However, these are really, really important subjects that need to be discussed to decrease stigma for healing. We're truly all about discussing things that can be difficult to talk about because really, when you think about it, cannabis is an amazing, amazing plant, is the most misunderstood plant in the world. And we have an obligation as nurses, morally, legally, and ethically to teach about this. So we all don't wake up one day and to enter into the cannabis industry. There's usually a compelling story that goes along with the plunge. What makes someone enter into the cannabis space as an attorney? Bryon Fair is an attorney. He's the founder of the Vermont's first cannabis law and consulting firm, Vermont Cannabis Solutions. Mr. Fair has been a vocal advocate for both cannabis and overall drug policy reform for most of his adult life. Since becoming an attorney in 2012, he has been fortunate enough to be part of the statewide movement to legalize cannabis in Vermont. Tim has been featured on a number of podcasts and radio shows, including the Ganjapreneur Podcast, VPR's Vermont Edition, In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio, and Paris Marketing's Creative Warrior Podcast. Mr. Fair has also been quoted in multiple national media sources, including The Washington Post, Marijuana Business Daily, and High Times Magazine. Tim has spoken on the topic of cannabis law at numerous seminars and events across the country, and was recently tapped to help design and teach Vermont's first continuing legal education course on cannabis business law in Vermont. When not lawyering, Tim is an avid swimmer and an occasional skydiver, which we're going to talk about later at the end of the show. So tonight we're going to hear Tim's story of what compelled him to become a cannabis attorney, and he will also provide us with tips and tricks to stay safe over the holidays. Welcome, Tim.
Hello, Sherry. Thank you so much for having me. I gotta say, I don't think I've ever heard my bio read out loud like that. Like, oh my God, I'm blushing.
Oh, good. Well, that's good though. You know what? It's like,
in such a short time we've accomplished. It's just mind-blowing.
It is mind-boggling. So when we enter into the cannabis space, can be really challenging, especially with the green rush and everyone trying to figure out this most misunderstood plant in the world. So you think about, you became an attorney in 2012. That's when I got sick and almost died. So it was just really interesting, you know, these parallel journeys that we have as not only clinicians, attorneys, but people in the industry. There's always a story that compels us to do what we do. So I'm really, really excited for you to share yours about what is your story of becoming a cannabis attorney. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Well, it's way back when, you know, that's a pretty long question. I guess I would start out with, you know, I was just the type of kid always who wanted to question authority. I didn't go along well with what I was told by anybody. And it wasn't that I was rebellious necessarily. I just wanted to know why, if I had to do something. And the answer, well, don't ask why, just do what I'm telling you, never really sat real well with me. And as I grew up, that kind of turned itself into questioning a lot of what was around us. And in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was growing up, you know, I'm 44 now, I was born in 76. So I was coming of age, so to say, right in the war on drugs era. I'm old enough to remember Nancy Reagan and the Just Say No. And even, you know, 13 or 14, questioning, okay, great, they cracked an egg, it's fried. What does that mean? What do drugs mean? What does that mean? I grew up in a household where cannabis use was not used openly, but was used. It was not, you know, so, you know, and I had some answers, you know, as 13, 14-year-old answers. And I was kind of given more of the straight kind of story from my parents at home. But school, the DARE program, all this, it never really stuck well with me. It didn't make sense. You know, it didn't logically make sense. I'm scared straight. I remember being brought to the jail, you know, growing up in New York and Long Island and Nassau County, and scared straight. Look at that. That's what's going to happen to you. You know, and to me, there was always something wrong with it. And I think as I grew up and I started to understand what was going on around me, as I started to do some research, as I started to learn some history about prohibition, about drug prohibition, about alcohol prohibition, about the Controlled Substances Act, about, you know, 1970s, why Nixon created the Controlled Substances Act, why classifications occurred the way they did. As I started to learn more, I got more and more upset. I got angry and angry.
Yeah.
Because I started to realize that everything that I've been told, everything that I've been taught in these programs like DARE, everything that, drugs are bad, drugs are bad, drugs are bad, drugs are bad. Why are drugs bad?
Yes.
And then as you start to realize drugs are actually bad because they're illegal. It's the prohibition that creates a lot of the problems that we see. And when I remember, this is funny, I tried to start a chapter normal when I was 17 years old. It was my first year at Nassau Community College. Guessing this was 1995. And I couldn't find a faculty sponsor willing to work with me on it. Of course, I was just a kid. I had no idea there was a national chapter and that I needed to apply. I thought you could just hang a banner at a college. But that was my first time actually trying to move forward with something like that and finding an unbelievable amount of resistance, even in a place like New York that most people think of as relatively liberal. And then I kind of went through my own challenges with drugs, which really kind of gave me a perspective that I think a lot of people, especially a lot of professionals, a lot of attorneys, don't necessarily have.
Right.
Do you
want to share your story?
Well, we talked a little bit before the show. I had my first college experience after graduating was SUNY New Paltz in upstate New York. I was there for about 3 weeks when I was caught with half a joint and a couple of pieces of bowls, a little mini bong. I was expelled on a one strike you're out policy that SUNY New Paltz had initiated in the fall semester of 1986. And they only kept it for one semester. 7 people were expelled on it, myself being included. After that, I ended up at Nassau Community, did a few semesters at community college, and ended up at University of Colorado Boulder. Did a lot of skiing, had a lot of fun. Didn't go to school very much. Still not ready there. Ended up starting skydive out there, and dropped out of college and started skydiving full time. And
skydiving.
Skydiving.
Skydiving is amazing. We were going to talk about it at the end, but we could bring it up now.
Just at a kind of a segue, I got into that lifestyle. I took my first jump, got hooked, moved out of my apartment, dropped out of school, moved on to the chop zone. And then after a little while and getting enough experience, I started going down south. And I would spend winters in, first one was in Eloy, Arizona, where a lot of people partied, a lot.
Right.
Following summer was in Zephyr Hills, Florida. And down there, I developed a cocaine habit. Cocaine was incredibly cheap. It was very plentiful. At that point, I've been skydiving for years. I was an experienced jumper. There was a lot of friends who were experienced jumpers, and we partied like crazy. And when I decided, when the point came to move back to Vermont and start kind of going back to school and taking my life seriously, I had a real hard time. I had a real hard time giving it up. And in 2002, 2004, I was arrested with 42 grams of cocaine in Burlington, Vermont.
Wow.
That was bottoming them out as much as bottoming them out could be. I had progressed from sniffing cocaine to smoking cocaine, and when that didn't work anymore, to IV injecting cocaine. At the time of my arrest, I thought my life was over. In fact, it probably saved my life. Another year or two, I probably would have been dead. A good chance. I had had a few overdoses already, where I went into seizures, and thank God pulled out.
Wow.
It was a pretty rough time for me. I was one of the rare. This is when people talk about white privilege. This is what white privilege is. I was one of the rare ones that was given a chance. I could have been sent away for 10 years. If I had brown skin, if I had black skin, if I was in a different part of the country. The gentleman we were talking to earlier, marijuana.
Oh my God, that was an amazing story.
Luckily, I was in a progressive court with a progressive prosecutor. They saw my potential and they gave me a chance. And they dropped the felony to successive misdemeanors. And they said, we're going to send you to jail for 3 months. And if you get out and on probation and you stay clean, we'll work with you. And it scared the heck out of me. And it did. It was what it took for me. And I did that 3 months and I got out. And then I began at that point turning my life around. By 2006, I was clean completely. Finished up my undergraduate by 2008. I graduated from Champlain College here in Burlington, my bachelor's. And in 2009, I applied for and was accepted into Vermont Law School, where I kept a very strong passion for criminal defense and drug policy reform. As you can imagine, the experience of having gone through addiction myself, and while cocaine was always my drug of choice, I would do anything. I'd heroin, sure, why not? Anyway, ecstasy, this, that, whatever. Didn't matter to me. Only thing I never really liked was to drink. Go figure.
There you go.
That's the one thing I've never had a problem with. And so when I talk about addiction, when I talk about drug policy reform, it's not from a purely academic perspective. I talk about it from a personal perspective. When I say cannabis can be used to beat a cocaine addiction, cannabis can be used to beat a heroin addiction, that's not me guessing. That's not me listening to anecdotal evidence. That's me telling you the truth from my own experience. Cannabis was one of the things that allowed me to break free. It was allowed me to get past it. It allowed me to move forward. When you're doing that many drugs, your entire identity becomes drugs. You are a drug. That's what you are. That's who you are. Your life revolves around getting high, getting
the fix. Oh, you just froze.
That becomes, and you don't know what's happening. And you need, and cannabis helped kind of compartmentalize that. And reminded me when that there was something else out there. There's a reason a lot of hard drug users don't smoke cannabis because it can break the addiction. It can remind you there's something else. Well,
that's it too. So you think about it when you come in from having an addiction, whether it be from alcohol or drugs, you think about what is depleted in our bodies, our mind, our body, and our spirit. So we have the bio, psycho, social, spiritual symptoms of loss. Right. And then it's really hard. Then you get on that cycle. I call it the merry-go-round, the shame cycle of, the stories, coulda, shoulda, dida, woulda, what could I have done differently? And then it just perpetuates. It perpetuates. And I think truly, when we study cannabinoid therapeutics and we know and understand that it works on all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to our body for homeostasis or balance. So when you come in as an addict, you're broken. Your mind's broken, your spirit's broken, and your body's broken. How can we put these people back together?
It's a multitude of ways. I'm not going to say smoking pot solves this.
No, I agree.
But as a component of taking yourself out of the environment.
Right.
Not having that contact, not having those reminders, moving yourself forward. A successor to, for me, it was getting back and, finishing my undergraduate, something I never believed I could do. When I was in the midst of my drugs, it wasn't the drugs. It was just, I can never do it. I tried, I give. No. And by realizing that and by accomplishing that, now you have some success to build on, and it just slowly comes. And the more success you feel, the less you need that identity, and the more you see reality, and you start to remember who you really are, and you come out of it. This is why I believe most addicts don't want to be addicts. This is not, you don't lock them up. This is not a criminal justice matter. This is a healthcare matter, whether it's mental health or along with physical health. Drugs should be free. Drugs should be readily available. If you want to do drugs, you should be able to go down to a state-sponsored building and get your drugs. And you know what? Every time you got to go through half an hour of counseling. And you can just feel your thumb. You don't have to participate, but you got to go through it. And you know what? I guarantee you, most of those addicts, they may not pay attention the first time or even the 10th time, but one of those times they're going to go in and they're going to go, you know what? Maybe this is actually something to it. And that would do so much more in helping our drug problem than this merry-go-round whack-a-mole system we have right now that does nothing but perpetuate misery and the
trauma,
exacerbated. I mean, we went through this with Prohibition. You don't see too many black market booze operations going on these days. There may be one or two here, but the purpose is when you regulate, when you have standardization, you don't have people going blind in the United States from alcohol poisoning. You don't have drive-by shootings. You don't have cartels running, bootleg moonshine anymore because you have a regulated system. We know this works. There's no reason this shouldn't work for cannabis as well. And cannabis is a lot less of a psychoactive and a lot less dangerous substance than alcohol.
Totally, 100%. I mean, it's like completely different universe. Cannabis supports the body. Alcohol is
actually occurring, substance.
Yes. Oh my God. So how do you see drug policy reform? How do you see it? How do you see it being best? So this is your opinion, not only as a professional, but as a patient. You know what I mean? So you are a medical cannabis patient as well. How do you see drug policy reform, playing out in a way that would benefit humanity?
I think we have to look at places that have had the courage to move forward with a different paradigm. Portugal. comes to mind as an excellent example of a first world nation that has adopted a non-confrontational, non-criminal justice decriminalization approach. This doesn't mean, every time you start talking about this, you get the, black and white, it has to be one or the other. Oh, so you can buy heroin in the store. No, you can't buy heroin in the store. You don't go down to 7-Eleven and get an 8-ball of cocaine. The point is that the entire paradigm of addiction is treated as a mental and physical health issue, not a criminal justice issue. So if people choose to do small amounts of substances, that's okay. And if they develop a problem, they can go and get treated for that problem. Most human beings like to alter their perception. This is nothing new. People have drank alcohol since the beginning of time. People smoke cannabis for thousands of years. People
have been doing psychedelics for thousands of years.
It's incorporated into spiritual traditions. It's incorporated into religious traditions. It's incorporated into recreational traditions. People like to change their perception. Whether it's coffee, caffeine, you call it what you want. And we in this, our modern society have classified, okay, alcohol, this is a good way to change your perception. Cigarettes, we don't like them, but, we're not going to shoot you over them. But these ones are incredibly bad. And these will lock you up. We will shoot you and your family and perhaps your dog if it barks too loud at us. And, maybe we're going after your neighbor and shoot you accidentally because of them. But yet most of them have analogs that can be prescribed. If you have health insurance, methamphetamine, 15 years, mandatory minimum. Adderall, no problem. There you go. Heroin, Xanax, morphine, OxyContin. So there's this blatant hypocrisy where if you get it from a doctor and you have the money to have a health insurance and you have a doctor who's going to prescribe them and you can get that prescription, you're okay. But if you get them on the street, you go to prison.
Right.
As an attorney and becoming an attorney and studying in criminal defense, which is where my kind of passion was, those questions I had as a kid, I didn't answer them. They just got worse. And you just got to more and more. Which is why now I am a very strong advocate, both locally, in writing, basically anyone to listen. What we're doing doesn't work. We've had prohibition on the war on drugs for 40 years.
Right.
Yeah.
When there's a war on anything, guess what? There's more war.
There's a lot of money to be made. A lot of money in rehab, a lot of money in law enforcement, a lot of money in asset forfeiture, a ton of money. Let me ask you this, Jerry. You probably know this. I ask most people I ask this question to do not know it. What is the one addicting drug that we have seen a significant marked decrease in since the initiation of the war on drugs?
Is it narcotics or antidepressants? It's either narcotics, antidepressants.
Just it's drug, period. I'm not even saying it's
one drug.
What's the drug we've seen a marked decrease in?
OxyContin.
Well, true. In the last few years, a little bit coming down, but I'm talking about nicotine. I'm talking about
cigarettes.
In 1970, 55% of American adults smoked cigarettes. Today, that's between 15 and 16%. And we did that through education. We didn't do that through raiding people's houses and shooting them or flashbangs through the window or, 18-month investigations and mandatory minimum No, we did it through teaching. We did it by showing people and teaching them really what these things do to you. They will kill you. We didn't outlaw them. We taught. And people made that decision on their own. You know what? I don't really want to die. I don't want to breathe through a tube in my neck. And we were honest, and it was truthful, and we trusted people to get the message. And sure, some people still smoke. I myself have struggled. I was able to quit everything. I just quit cigarettes a month ago. I haven't had one for a month. I'm very happy. But we did this through education. And that, again, we have the model of how we should be handling drug policy. We should be handling it as a health issue. And when we do handle it as a health issue, we're successful.
Totally agree. So here's a question for you. What is it going to take to deschedule cannabis? Because I have an issue with it being scheduled, and it has to do with our youth. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute.
I'd love to hear it. That's a very, it's a tough situation. But ultimately, and this is what the courts have felt, at least on the federal level, the Controlled Substances Act, which is where these schedules and classifications come from, was a legislatively enacted law. And not by the executive, we all know, executive, judicial, legislative. The legislature has to change it. So the House and the Senate must agree. And that's the only way it's really going to get changed. The judiciary can't do it. These keep bringing court cases. The DEA can't schedule this, number one. What are they kidding me? Blah, blah, blah. And the courts have basically been like, you know what? Even if we agree with you, and maybe we do, this is a legislatively created act. It's a legislatively created law, and the remedy needs to be legislatively created as well. We're not going to supersede the will of Congress. And that's the answer to when people say, well, can't you just do it by executive order or executive action? Yeah, I mean, maybe. But that's not going to change it permanently.
It's not going to change.
Change needs to get done legislatively.
Yeah. So scheduling. So here's the issue that I have with it when it comes to kids. The DARE program is one thing. The second thing has to do with a patient, a teenager that I took care of that was addicted to heroin. And he got off the heroin. And basically when we had the discussion and conversation, because he was off of it, he was completely 100% straight, but he was having issues with PTSD, complex PTSD, anxiety, depression, literally, these things plagued him. So my question to him was, what was it about the heroin that made you want to try it? And he said, because this is what he said. This is interesting. Heroin and cannabis were on the Schedule 1. So we went through the whole scheduling. He brought this up and he says, cannabis is equal to heroin. So I saw that cannabis is legal in certain states for medicine. Cannabis is legal in certain states for adult use. And so you're all lying about cannabis. Why wouldn't you be lying about heroin?
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Here we have a child that doesn't trust or believe in the system and took his matters into his own hand because he sees adults and the law lying.
You get caught lying once, who's going to believe you again? That's the problem with the DARE program. The DARE program lies. I wish I could say that's the first time I've heard something like that. And unfortunately, it's not. And that's the problem with those type of fear and shock programs. Once the teenage adolescent mind realizes you've lied to them, once you lost, you're not going to get them back.
Lost all connection.
Be honest.
Yeah, it was very interesting too. Like we had earlier this year before COVID-19, I worked with two teenagers in high school. They were doing their capstone project before they graduated, and their question was, can cannabinoids or hemp products replace opioids? And so it was very interesting. They came to the office and I did like a little presentation with them, which was really fun. And then they went back and did created their presentation. And I said, what might be really fun is why don't you guys come on the show and we'll talk about what you learned and you can use. So they came onto the radio show podcast, which is up on YouTube. And it was just amazing to hear what they were able to learn. And they were able to take, and because of COVID-19, they weren't able to do their capstone project. So what they were able to do was to take the radio show and submit it to their school to watch.
Were they going to let them? Are they going to actually let them?
Yes.
What state is this in? That's incredible.
This is in Massachusetts. It was a high school.
I don't think it's Alabama.
It was a couple of towns away from where our office is. And it was actually a nurse who follows our radio show podcast contacted me privately and said, my son's interested in doing a capstone project on hemp and cannabis. Yes.
That's normalization. This is reality. This is what kids should be taught. And they should be taught, yes, like alcohol, like any mind-altering substances, is not something for you to do right now because it's going to turn your head up. It's going to make life even harder. When you're 18, when you're 21, when you're an adult, you can make that decision then. And is it going to stop kids? Of course not. Kids are going to get their hands on alcohol. Kids are going to get their hands on marijuana. Kids are going to get their hands on anything. But ask any kid today, is it easier for you to get alcohol at your high school or weed? And 9 out of 10 are weed. Because there's nobody selling black market alcohol again.
Right.
But reality and teaching them and allowing a project like that. When I was growing up, they would not let you teach projects like that.
I know. It's really. I was fascinated. And I think probably too, because Massachusetts, medical cannabis, was legal in 2012 and then adult use in 2016. So, I think it's really important. The other thing that was interesting too, was when I first started using cannabis as a nurse and as a patient, mostly, my kids saw how sick and suffering I was. And when I started to develop the Green Nurse platform and started to develop the educational platform, you need to teach it in a way because we learn all these abstract concepts. We learn about the endocannabinoid system, neurotransmitter signaling systems, all this medical mumbo jumbo, which is really, really important to know. But when you're educating patients, You need to bring it down so they can understand it. So my kids were my first students. And so when I wrote the patient handbook and started to educate, I asked them to sit down and I presented to them. And at the end of the presentation, this was very fascinating. I said to them, so guys, what do you think about mom being a medical marijuana nurse? And they looked at me and they go, cannabis and marijuana is the same thing. All they heard was, the slang marijuana. They never really learned the scientific terminology and what cannabinoid therapeutics was, how the plant works, how our body. Never learned any of it. So they were kind of blown away, and they, and their ability to work with that information and seeing the transformation from me going from sick and suffering on over 18 pharmaceuticals to slowly over time coming off of those pharmaceuticals and my quality of life improving, where I could engage again, and so it's interesting. And then they could see that it wasn't just about the cannabis, that mommy would use the cannabis, but mommy would also go for a walk and go do yoga and maybe do a little dance and cook something healthy and take her vitamins and go to therapy and go to acupuncture and go to chiropractic care. Right. So I wasn't just taking cannabis and sitting around doing nothing.
Right. And just like anything, that's not good. Just like sitting around and drinking alcohol all day is not good. Or sitting around eating McDonald's all day is not good. Doing anything to excess is not good.
It's not good.
That's a person, not the substance. I find that so funny the way you say that, because when you look back in 1931, when Harry Anslinger first started the campaign against marijuana, he needed to come up with a term because people knew cannabis. Cannabis was all widely used in known medicine. People liked it. You weren't going to turn people against cannabis. But marijuana, on the other hand, that's a monster. That sounds vaguely Latino. And then black jazz musicians. So they had to separate marijuana from cannabis in order to demonize it. Now, on full term, where people are like, oh, that's the same thing. I kind of like the symmetry of that now. Have you, by any chance, read anything or happened to see any presentations by Dr. Bernie Lee from the Einstein School of Medicine in New York City?
No, I haven't, but I'm interested.
I have a chance, Sherry. I attended one of his courses 2 years ago on the science of endocannabinoid medicine. And that's where I learned, that's my eyes were open to the endocannabinoid system, and where I learned everything I knew. Really great resource. If you have a chance, I think you really.
What's his name? I'm going to put the name in the comments.
Dr. Bernard or Bernie Lee is what he goes by. When 2 years ago when I attended, it was working at the Einstein School of Medicine in New York. Okay,
Einstein School of Medicine. I just want to write that down so we can. Einstein School. All right, cool. All right, that's awesome, because any resources. Love to educate, any resources. So what's interesting is because I first met you, Tim, at the American Cannabis Nurses Association, prior to meeting you in the weeds, but I first met you and heard you present at the American Cannabis Nurses Association 2020 Cannabis Care Conference. So
you weren't you?
Yes, I did. It was really interesting. It was very interesting. My presentation was spirituality is the root of cannabis care, because truly, you always hear my tagline, we're here to get you high, but really what we're trying to do is decrease the stigma around what it means to feel good. And so we've changed the analog of high to mean hope, inspiration, growth, and healing. And the reason why is because my story and a lot of other patient stories, clinician stories in particular, what was the first thing that cannabis brought us? It brought us hope. It opened up our mind to something different. Right. And when we have that hope, we become inspired. And when we're inspired, we're in spirit. And when we're inspired, we get excited, we get creative, we want to do something different. Exactly. So hope and inspiration, and then growing in health is actually doing something different, to get off of that merry-go-round. Hope, inspiration, growth, and healing. Healing isn't the absence of illness or disease, but healing is doing the best you can with what you have right here, right now. So truly, that's what we educated on. There's a big, huge spiritual component that's missing from traditional healthcare. Usually, as I talk about before, as clinicians in the traditional system, we're focused on body parts, symptoms, and disease processes. If we're lucky, we get to mental, emotional, psychological health, and rarely do we ever get to a patient's spiritual health. So we're really, what we're seeing with the plant is that we're kind of doing things a little bit differently, connecting with patients to their spirit first and asking them very important questions. What's important to you and how do you want to live your life? Has anyone ever asked you that question as a clinician?
I've never been asked that as an attorney.
There you go, right? So what's important to you? How do you want to live your life? And then we go on a journey. We'll hold your hand until you're ready to let go, because people are afraid. They're really, really afraid. And I'm here to tell you that there is nothing to be afraid of, and not at all. So when you presented at the American Cannabis Nurses Association, what did you present on?
Well, we've worked with the American Cannabis Nurses Association for almost a year now. We wrote a few pieces, and we tried to give the feedback that the membership's looking for. And this time, what we heard a lot, and we were getting a lot of questions about, was liability. And this is something that transcends just nursing, but all professions.
Did you say liability?
Liability. Being a professional and being in the cannabis space. Those are things that traditionally have not gone together. You didn't see too many professionals in the cannabis space. And a lot of what we were hearing from the membership was, well, what about, by being a cannabis nurse, what can I be arrested? Can I lose my nursing license? What can happen to me? So, and we thought those were really, really important questions. So my law partner, Andrew, and I put together, we had first written a newsletter article about it. And then we presented on, the risks and liabilities of being a cannabis nurse, being a nurse, being a licensed professional, and advocating for, educating about cannabis. And we kind of broke it into 3 sections. We talked about, potential criminal liability, potential administrative liability on one's nursing license, and then potential civil liability through the, civil courts of could be sued for talking about cannabis. I think it was a really interesting program. I think that, I think we were able to kind of point out, the best practices, some do's and some don'ts. There are certainly things that can get you into trouble if you're not aware of them, or you even accidentally kind of cross a line. So it's important to know where those lines are. But if you know where those lines are, and you are in a jurisdiction like Massachusetts that has legalized, then often it is possible to start teaching and educating your patients about this.
Right. Truly, I agree. It's and that's the part that's interesting, is because I can't work in the traditional system anymore because I am full of cannabinoids, and basically I've reinvented myself, so when I got sick and, nothing worked, nothing worked, and cannabis came into my life and saved my life. And I tried to go back to work, and every single time I tried to go back to work, I would get another condition or another, basically the universe was telling me, your time in the traditional system is done. It is now time for you to focus on your health and to reinvent yourself. So that was truly, cannabis was the key that unlocked the door, for multiple other, and I just see us now, being able, educating and empowering patients. That's truly what it is.
Think about all the lives you have had a positive impact on. Think of all the people you have helped since that pivot and transitioning into this, and tell me everything doesn't happen for a reason. This is where you want to be right now, Think about it.
It's really funny, because part of the story too is I went to Boston College, and this is what helped me to get out of the cannabis closet. So I went to BC. I graduated in 1988, so I'm a little old. But it was funny to get caught smoking a J behind the bushes at BC. 30 years later, in 2018, Boston College asked myself and some of my cannabis nursing colleagues to teach a class on cannabinoid therapeutics to the advanced practice nurse practitioners graduating in 2018. So it's truly unheard of a BSN. I didn't have my master's. I don't have my PhD. I'm not a nurse practitioner. To be asked into the college that I graduated from to teach a class. So I was like, holy schmoly, this is real. This is happening. How amazing. I'm on the right path. And so that's what compelled me to truly come out of the closet and say, you know what, I'm either all in or I'm all out. And that's why I started my podcast. I'm in.
You gotta take that leap of faith. I did it 2018. I had colleagues telling me, Tim, you're crazy. You'll be disbarred. You're going to be a pariah. You're never going to get any business. No one's ever going to hire you. This is the craziest thing you could ever done. My old boss was very progressive and very supportive. He was a normal supporter. Everybody was like, Tim, this might be a little. It worked out so far.
So far, it's really when you figure out how to turn around your life. This is what we call post-traumatic growth. I mean, granted, you were traumatized by the system. I was traumatized by the system. And then to be able to turn that around for healing and to bring something different to the world, that is so needed. This is the most misunderstood plant in the world. So truly truly, truly honored to be working with you and Joe Smith at In the Weeds, Prohibition Talk Radio.
Oh, so much fun. Such a great
I
time.
know. I'm really, really honored to be part of your platform.
Really I had an excellent perspective.
Well, it is. And the part of the perspective that's just a little bit different is that I'm a registered nurse and I'm also a patient. And how I learned about cannabis, because my stigma was so thick. My mom blocked me on Facebook. She wrote me out of her will. Oh, I paid for Boston College and you're a drug dealer. Like, okay, Mom, I'm getting better. But it was okay. But my mother's on the bus now. She's on the cannabis. Oh, yeah. Because of the nun. So I said, you know what? I have to figure this out. I know it works. You know, it was just me trying to figure out how to make it work for me so I could medicate and function below the threshold of feeling impaired. So now we figured it out. You know what I mean? There is a way to use this plant effectively, and you can control your experience. And that's what we teach. And so basically over the course of time, me taking care of multiple patients, I had a nun on my show, and it was the nun that actually.
So the bit you talked about a little bit, did a presentation a couple weeks ago on In the Weeds. Yeah, that was a great story. She was amazing.
She was really amazing. And then my mom decided to get on the bus. And so it's really interesting, you know, to working with her. And she called me up. She goes, okay, what's the gateway? So I started her on topicals, you know. And
that's a great way to start.
Exactly. But now she's truly enjoying the full benefits of the plant. She actually asked to have a recreational experience once. So I gave her some chocolate and I said, 1 square. That's it. 1 square. And she had a whole bar. Thank God she didn't eat the whole bar. But the next day she called me up. She goes, I ate a couple squares. I go, oh gosh, Mom, are you okay? And she goes, I felt it. And I go, and how did you feel? She goes, it felt really good.
People are amazed, right? They're like, oh my God, that's what it is. Wow.
And so she was, you know, so she came out of the closet. She came out of the closet. She was on my show. And basically the biggest thing that she said to me was this. She said, I was one of those old lady reefer madness. I was the one that judged everyone. She goes, I even judged my daughter. And she said to me, she goes, cannabis makes me feel good and I'm not high. And I said, okay, so what does it mean to feel good and not be high? Well, the pains become background noise. I'm a little less anxious. I'm sleeping a little bit better. I'm not so mean. I'm a little bit nicer. And I'm not so depressed about all my medical problems. And I said, but are you high? And she goes, no, I'm not. I feel good. But she also shared too, you know, her experience of taking the chocolate and how wonderful it was. She says, you know what? I truly enjoyed the movie. I got engrossed. I giggled a little bit more. I slept great. And, you know, and I woke up feeling good. So that's, you know, and this is a 75-year-old woman. Yeah. Cannabis for the win. Yes. So on your weekly segments In the Weeds, what do you talk about? So you have a weekly.
Primarily, you know, the kind of hot topics of the week, do the run through of, you know, the cannabis world, so to say, any big stories, any big legal cases or lawsuits. We do some business. We talk about some stock and finance issues. And a lot of politics, a lot of talking about both state, you know, a lot of people don't fully grasp kind of the difference between state and federal legalization, which is very complex. That's why a lot of lawyers don't like this area.
Very complex.
You know, and what implicates, and then now we have hemp legal and not. So, you know, the industry itself on both the hemp and the adult use and the medical sides all have so many kind of interconnected pieces, but yet so many differences. That we spend a lot of time kind of flushing those out and trying to answer the questions that you know, come up in everyday conversation. Try to stay away from the high end stuff and the real, you know, detailed. At the office, we've been arguing for the last month about Delta 8 THC and why synthetic production. You know, we try to stay away from kind of the real life stuff and kind of focus more on, like, you know, well, is this going to pass federally, and what does it mean if it's federally legal or federally illegal versus the state? And try to keep it at that level. I think, you know, sometimes we have some really great conversations.
Yeah, I truly enjoy it. I mean, I've been on the show for the past couple of weeks. It's every Wednesday In the Weeds, Prohibition Talk Radio, every Wednesday from 4:20 to 6:20 p.m. And Nurse Mark and I have a segment on the show, is Canna Talk. And so we literally talk about, you know, cannabis wellness and some of the different tips and tricks, Terpene Tuesday tips and tricks and things that are important.
I love it.
What was that?
I said Terpene Tuesday. I love it.
Yeah,
It's one of my big things. The whole kind of TV drives me nuts. You know,
yeah.
teach people about cannabinoids. I want to teach people about cannabinoid and terpene profiles so they can really fully understand the plant. And kind of, again, I'm just big on truth these days. And reality.
Yes, me too. Okay, so we're going into the holidays. And basically, it's really, really important for people to be smart, to stay safe, besides the COVID-19 stuff, even about consumption, about driving. So safety over the holidays, what are your tips and tricks? And what would you recommend if people get into a legal bind?
First and foremost, a little bit of common sense goes a long way, and that's especially relevant to cannabis. One of the nice things, however, about cannabis versus, let's say, alcohol, the other big holiday intoxicant, is that generally when people are intoxicated on cannabis, they don't lose their ability to perceive the same way they do as alcohol. For example, driving. When you're drunk, you think you can drive. When you're too stoned to drive, you usually sit on the couch. I'm too stoned to drive. I'm going to give myself a minute. But that is important if you are one of those impulsive people who may not stop and think. If you've consumed, take stock of yourself. Am I okay to drive? Am I really okay to drive? There are a lot of people there's a lot of intoxicated people on the roads. There's a lot of alcohol intoxicated people. There's a lot of law enforcement on the road during the holiday season. They're going to be looking at anything to pull you over, and you don't want to be in that situation. So really be careful with the driving, especially if maybe you've consumed a little cannabis and had a drink or two. That can tend to exacerbate the effects of the alcohol. If you're normally, I can have 4 or 5 beers. I had 1 eggnog, a little rum, 1 joint. Combining the two can have that effect. So be very, very careful. Edibles, know what you're doing. If you are attending a party with family who maybe have not had them before, and maybe you're in a legal state and you've got, Aunt Bonnie going, oh, I want to try some of that, don't just, let them know what it is. This is 10 milligrams. This is 15 milligrams. You should start slow, start low, start slow. Take 1 or 2. And you don't feel that, okay, then we'll step it up a little bit. Believe me, you'd rather not feel it and step up than have a Maureen Dowd experience.
Yeah, I call it greening out. And I've done that. I've done all the experimenting for everyone out there. So if you want to know what it means to green out. That's really important. Communicate. You might think it's funny to go give, Uncle Willie a cookie. It's not funny. It's not
because they're not going to know what it is, and they're not going to enjoy it, and they're not going to understand it. And in fact, that can make things even worse in terms of trying to get people to understand that this is not a dangerous substance. So be open, be transparent, and don't be afraid to educate. Don't be afraid to teach people. A lot of times, the prohibitionists have never tried cannabis. They don't know anything about it. All they know is the propaganda, and maybe they're close to it. Maybe they don't want to hear it, but maybe they do. Especially with other people, they're interested. And don't ever pass up an opportunity to teach. Don't ever pass up an opportunity. If there's somebody who is willing to learn, you almost have an obligation to try.
Absolutely. So what happens if someone gets pulled over? And, that's a big one. Pulled over and the big smoking cloud comes out
out of your car, or you're in a non-legal jurisdiction, or you're exceeding your legal jurisdiction and the police become involved. What do we do? I can't stress this enough. Be polite. Do not be aggressive. Don't get angry. Don't start yelling at the cop. You be polite, you be friendly, but you be firm. Officer, I'm not answering any questions. Am I free to go? And you're either free to go or you're not. But what people try to do is they try to talk their way out of it. Oh, I smoked a joint. Maybe it was like 2 hours ago I smoked. I'm fine now. No, you just admitted to consuming cannabis. Now you just admitted to DUI. Now it's going to make my job as a criminal defense attorney that much harder because they have you on record stating you consumed an illegal substance and got behind the wheel of a car. You may be able to drive fine. Maybe I know plenty of people who can take a couple hits off a joint and have no problem driving whatsoever. In fact, they may come down the road rage a little bit. But that's, as far as law enforcement is concerned, the minute you admit to consuming, you are guilty. And that's a hard question to get past. Now you are definitely going to need a lawyer. Now you are definitely going to probably need to take the case to trial. So your best bet is to not try to talk your way out of it, not be mean, not be rude. But with all due respect, officer, I'm not going to be answering any questions. Am I free to go? No?
Okay. If they say no, then what?
Then you say, all right, then you go willingly with them, and the first opportunity, you contact a lawyer. Right. And I know not everybody can afford a lawyer. I'm not I do a lot of pro bono work, believe me, because whenever I get a call like that, I'm like, whatever, don't even worry about that. I'll take care of you. And not everybody has access to, not all lawyers feel that way. If it's a public defender, if it's a legal aid line, if it's just not saying anything to law enforcement, so you have an opportunity. You're not going to go to jail for DUI. You're not going to go to jail in most jurisdictions for a small quantity of cannabis. If you're unfortunate enough to be in one of those jurisdictions, then again, you're not going to talk your way out of it. The best bet is to keep your mouth shut until you have a chance to talk to counsel, until you have a chance to talk to somebody who's on your side. Because law enforcement is not on your side. They're not your friends. Not in that situation.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really good advice. Really, really important. So, Tim, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been great. So where can people find you besides in the weeds?
Yeah, in the weeds, and then you can find both of us, which is fun, along with Tom Marcom, who does some great grow coaching, and Joe and the whole crew. That's in the weeds, as you mentioned. My own site is VermontCannabisSolutions.com. We are a Vermont-based law and consulting firm, but we do a lot of consulting, especially in the hemp and CBD side, nationwide.
All over the country, right?
Country. I'm a federally licensed attorney, so I can work in the federal system as well as our state system. I'm only barred to practice state law in Vermont, but when it comes to consulting on hemp, which is a federal issue under the Farm Bill, we're very happy to do so. And we're also part of the International Cannabis Bar Association. So if anybody has a legal problem in their state that we might not be able to help with personally, we are more than happy to throw a referral, to put you in touch with a colleague, because we do now have cannabis law attorneys in all 50 states. So don't hesitate to reach out. www.VermontCannabisSolutions.com. You can search Tim Fair Cannabis. I pop up a lot, apparently. Feel free to reach out to me at any time, email, phone. I love talking to people. I love the industry. I love to help.
Awesome. Tim Fair, Vermont Cannabis Solutions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sherry. I can't wait to see you next week.
All right.
Remember,
happy holiday, Merry Christmas. Join us tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for our Nurse Mark, Green Nurse, AFA Daily Dose. And remember, everyone, it's truly about living your best life and helping others do the same.
Absolutely.